Well, it's interesting because this past year plus has been very trying for every company under the sun, really, and looking at doing things differently. I think the one area, though, that I don't see this being a threat to sustainability, because I think with COVID-19 and what it's done, it's opened so many eyes around things like supply chains and consolidation of supply chains and the risks that come with that. Also, the issues around waste and resources have come to light as well, a lot more than we could have ever imagined. So I really think that, if anything, the pandemic has boosted or accelerated brands' desires and focus around investing in more sustainable opportunities. I think, just look around. Vinted, a re-commerce site in Europe, just received investment of 250 million euros to expand across Europe. Another example is Poshmark's CEO I think it was announced yesterday, is going to be presenting at 2 investment meetings at Morgan Stanley, which I think, it's a sign of the times to say, actually, if anything, sustainability efforts and definitely circularity are going up, and this can only be a good thing. That's a big question, and I think there's a lot of context that we need to fill in around that. If you're talking about, moving towards more circular supply chains, and where we're using technologies like ours that can take in post-industrial, post-consumer textile waste, break it down, produce new raw materials to then go back into supply chains all over again. I think that's a total transformation of supply chains, and it's not going to happen overnight. There are going to be stepping stones for doing that. And ultimately, what I think this will lead to are more regional models for production, consumption, where we're using the resources more regionally. The waste that's produced there, whether it's post-consumer or post-industrial, will then go back into reprocessing more regionally, and then back into supply chains to become fiber, textiles, garments all over again. But I think that kind of transition to regional models is going to take at least a decade plus, probably 2, where we're going to start seeing that shift. And we're going to see it in stepping stones. We're already starting to see reshoring happening. I mean, the US is very big on this. It's going to happen in Europe. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because what that means is that other regions where we're, more traditionally manufacturing are going to evolve into their own models for production as well. I would say global, because I don't think we're going to have a one size fits all. I
Hmm.
think ultimately the economics and the environmental issues will drive it, because more and more environment environmental metrics are becoming more important, with industry targets like the UN Fashion Climate Change Pact. The industry has targets to meet now, and if those targets mean that we produce or manufacture or consume in a slightly different way, then that's going to be the outcome of those targets. Also a very good one, because it's fascinating to see the interplay between how we behave as shoppers, what role government play, how brands, how everyone interacts in this kind of big picture. And I think consumers have a very big role in terms of holding brands to account, making sure they're vocal about what they expect, what they want to see from the industry, how they want their clothes to be made. But equally, a lot of people don't have time. They have jobs in other industries. Maybe they're not interested in all the big issues behind the fashion industry. So I think at the very least, just making yourself aware of what goes into textile and clothing production, understand what happens at end of life, learn about innovations that are in development that are going to start changing the way textiles are made and recycled, and then ultimately it's down to us to make sure that whatever clothes we do buy, whether they're new or whether they're through reuse models or whether we're repairing them, that once they do reach end of use or end of life for us, don't throw them in the bin, get them back into the system. And there's so many different ways of doing that these days. Even if they're non-rewearable, make sure they go back in a textile bin, because in the not so distant future, we're going to have large scale industrial solutions that will be able to break those textiles down, recapture the raw materials, and put them back into new clothing. Like textiles back into textiles. And I think for me, that's one of the most exciting things that from, an average consumer, if there is such a thing, perspective, we don't know this stuff is happening, and to kind of educate yourself, learn about what is coming, what's possible today, and also a lot of the exciting new business models around re-commerce, rental. There's so much creativity going into textile, into clothing experiences that we can't get bored with it. Get involved, get engaged. I really like that idea, but I don't think we're going to get that to that level of integration in house, because we don't produce enough textile waste on an individual level. It's only once it gets aggregated, you know, neighborhoods, cities, where that kind of level of sortation will then be required. But I do remember someone recently, we were talking about the future and what it could look like for textile collection. And someone had mentioned this idea of having these like tubes in our houses that we put our clothes into, and then they just go underground and get shot off somewhere where they get separated and sorted and reprocessed. But yeah, that would be quite exciting. But I think there's a lot of evolution happening on textile sorting and preparation. But that's kind of over the next sort of 2 to 5 years where we're going to see some really big changes there. Yes, I agree. I don't like that word recycled, because when it comes to clothing and fashion, no one wants to really, I mean, sometimes it's cool recycling, but often it's come with a stigma. And I think from a consumer perspective, there's a real need to rebrand the concept of recycled. And that's what brands and retailers are amazing at in terms of rebranding and positioning. So I think this idea of circular is a new concept that people might be able to, you know, tag onto, or internalize or be attracted to. And then I think from an industry perspective, the idea of recycled, when you're sourcing recycled content, there's often a stigma with it, because you can often have quality issues, whether it's our pet from plastic bottles being slightly inferior to virgin PET, whether it's recycled cotton, which you have to blend with virgin cotton to get the right quality. That's always going to be a challenge. But I think as we move towards more circular models and we move towards regenerative recycling processes that are able to produce virgin equivalent quality raw materials, the industry bias is hopefully going to shift there. And as well, let's rebrand it. Let's change our language. Maybe circular isn't the right word because it's the only buzzword at the moment. But purified materials rather than recycled, which can maybe sound dirty or not so nice. That is that's an evolving, or a question that has had an evolving answer over the years. I think, to see that that's even a question now, when, 5, 8 years ago, you wouldn't have dreamed of people asking that question. So it's a real delight to see that happening, because there are, 101, maybe 1,001 different answers for that. But I think if we look kind of overall and at a macro perspective, um, starting with design, but thinking about end of life, that's kind of one of the most important angles to look at, because there's all sorts of circular solutions for re-commerce and reuse, which today are just flourishing. And that creativity around those business models, both new companies and the big brands and retailers, are all innovating around how we can keep products as products for as long as possible. When we talk about designing for recycling, it's a bit more complex, because we need to ask ourselves, are we designing for what's available today, or are we designing for what's going to be available in the future? If we're designing for mechanical recycling, okay, that exists today. It's possible. It has challenges, but it's possible. You will want to look at monofiber design, like pure polyester, so it can go back into a pure polyester recycling process. However, if you're designing for regenerative recycling, for processes like ours, like Renewcell, Carbios, there's a whole handful of regenerative recyclers, then you can be a lot more open in your design, and in some ways carry on designing as you are today. Um, that's a bit controversial now, because the conversation has advanced quite dramatically. But I think, as an example, designing for our process, you can carry on using blends, polyester and cotton. The more polyester and cotton or cellulose that you use in the design, the more raw materials that will come out purified at the end. If it comes with elastane or wool or nylon or other fibers, in our process, that's going to come out as waste. So I think there's a quite an exercise to do in terms of matching up design today for circularity and end of life solutions, and how we're going to marry the two up to make sure that what's been designed for one process or one end use will get to that end use, and actually continue in terms of the circularity of the raw materials that are used. I think a lot is definitely happening in Europe. Designing policy that will support innovation, that will support the changes that are coming, that will prevent textiles from landfill, that will marry up the solutions with the problems. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is really identifying, what policy change at the right time will work. So the EU ban on textiles to landfill in 2025, I think, is an ideal timeline, because it gives time for innovators to get to market with industrial solutions. It gives time for infrastructure evolution, for the collectors and the sorters to plan and to organize how they're going to collect, how they're going to sort differently, and what these new markets are going to be. I there are many examples of how this is happening really well. The Netherlands are doing fantastic legislation and policy change around, what sort of, how they can work with brands in the short term, what needs to happen with collection, and yeah, that's the only way to do it, is to bring all the stakeholders together to understand what those stepping stones are.
Mhm.
In the UK here, we just another example, Textiles 2030 has just been launched, and it's an initiative that's aiming to move the UK to a circular textile future by 2030, which I think is very ambitious, but it's doing just that. It's bringing together, the policy change, the infrastructure change, the investment that's needed, and all of those, it's bringing the components of the system together to then, work more seamlessly, because I think historically, the textile industry has been very siloed. So this is where circularity and the kind of end vision, in my head, comes to play, because for me, a circular future is, we launched something recently called World Circular Textiles Day,
Mhm.
where we imagined what a circular future could look like. And we imagined it in three streams: materials, raw materials, products and services, and people. And we imagined what will each of those three areas look like by 2050, because I think it's going to take a lot longer to really shift the whole system. And from a products perspective, yes, we keep using them, we keep recirculating them until they can no longer be used. Then they go into raw material recycling. We currently have enough polyester in circulation today to satisfy our annual demand for new polyester, but it's being thrown away. It's being incinerated. It's going to landfill. All we have to do is capture it, recapture it, reprocess, purify it. And, we could easily and very quickly move to a world where there is no virgin polyester being used anymore for textiles. Like that's the end goal. And I think on the cotton side, cotton isn't a circular material because it's a natural fiber. It loses quality, over time, during wear and tear, during, laundry. But what kind of polyester is the ideal circular material because you can rebuild the polymer chain. It's man-made and you can rebuild it. On the cotton side, what we can do is break it down and recapture the cellulose. And cellulose, yes, still a natural material, has potential to go through, systems multiple times, before you start seeing that degradation. So I could see this kind of future where we're polyester, 100% circular. Cotton, we start reducing our dependence on cotton, and we're looking at regenerative agriculture to produce smaller volumes of cotton, whereas cellulose can carry on. All the cotton to cellulose regenerative recyclers, that's our output, is a cellulose, and we can keep taking that back through our processes again and again. That's very exciting. I think that, the kind of circularity of raw materials is absolutely achievable. But yeah, we've got a long way to go because, today we're only less than 1%, as I'm sure you know, of existing textiles are going back into new textiles. If we collect them, if we reprocess them, then we can get very close to 80, 90, 100% if we design the system. Your question about design is exciting because I don't think it's just about design of an individual product. It's about designing the system, designing all of the materials we're going to use, designing the infrastructure, the collection systems, linking up policy. It's all of that stuff, which is happening now. I'm animated today because we've never seen so much activity in this space. And maybe COVID has given us that opportunity while we're all sitting and working via Zoom to really focus on what that could look like.